Today's guest on the Keen Yoga podcast is Sravana Borkataky-Varma. I'm glad I got that right. So Sravana has always had an interest in the spiritual. Indeed, when she was young, she experienced a clairvoyancy on a regular basis that led to her parents initiating her at their family temple, Karmakura, where she developed her own spiritual practice and continued this from a very early age, in fact. A really interesting part of our conversation. However, not fully satisfied with this, she developed an interest in Buddhism, actually, where she planned for a while to become a nun, a Buddhist nun, studying then instead for a master's in Buddhism, which she completed. Life changed course, and one thing led to the next. She ended up in the financial IT industry, which led her to work in China and then finally to the US. So she's currently a lecturer at Harvard Divinity School and at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. Her speciality is Tantra, and specifically Tantra in the female body, which has been slightly confrontational for many, and has led to extensive fieldwork in India, in certain temples where they still practice the most literal form of this Tantra that our work focuses on. So this is a really, really unique and interesting interview that's very much our first for Keen Yoga, an eye-opening discussion for a subject which is often brushed under the carpet. And Shravana's work is a really cutting edge, and her confidence, I suppose her willingness to approach and her bravery and honesty in this subject that has been taboo for many years is quite remarkable. So she's emerging as a leading light in the field of this subject of modern yoga, and we shall certainly be hearing more of her in the future. And for now, welcome Shravana to the Keen Yoga podcast. It's such an honor to have you. Right, so today's guest is Sravana Borkataky-Varma. Is that roughly?
Close enough.
Close enough. All right, we'll leave it there. Right, okay. So Sravana is currently a professor at Harvard University, and she's particularly interested and works a lot on Tantra and but the female body in Tantra as well is, I think, a speciality, right? Female iterations of Tantra. Today we're going to talk about Kundalini specifically. I suppose we'll touch on Tantra, I assume, but modern ideas of Kundalini. Kundalini yoga is obviously currently quite in vogue in the West, and Sravana has actually been in the field a great deal, actually studied at source in these practices, in their locale, in their tradition in India. So what are the differences between what we're doing in the West and what Kundalini, ideas and iterations of Kundalini, maybe traditionally, let's say, that's a loaded word, but let's say, more more textually. So before going down that path, welcome, Sravana, and do you just want to but briefly, because you've been mute so far, you've been completely mute. So tell us a little bit how you arrived in the US and your story, your background, because you do have although we talked a little bit before, you do have a really interesting story. And I'd like to just hear a few minutes that story again. Yeah.
Thank you, first of all, Adam, for inviting me to your wonderful podcast. It's really a beautiful platform to reach out to so many people across the globe. So thank you, first of all. Adam, as I was telling you, and I always laugh, I'm like, what's in my story? But I guess there is a story. Everyone has a story. So I'm going to do it quickly because I don't want to take all the time talking about my story because I'm so tired of telling my own story.
Retell it in a different way.
Retell it in a different way. I wish I was such a wonderful storyteller. I'm not. I'm pretty boring. But anyway, here it is. So from India, my name, as you know, is Sravana Borkataky-Varma. There you go, Adam. Next time, there will be a quiz for you on my name.
Got it.
So I'm from Assam, India. Assam is a state in the northeastern part of India. So I was born there, and my family comes from there. We are we like any other child, born, raised the usual way in an Indian middle class family. I think what was possibly now when I look back in my 40s, there was this element of my life as a child, which I think was kind of is not normal for everybody. But I did not realize that for the longest period of time of my time. I had what I have now come to have understood, maybe what would be understood as a clairvoyance, clairaudience skills. And
no, that's not normal. That's
it's not, right?
I think that's not normal. No.
So. Yeah. But growing up, I thought that's normal, and I think there is some beauty to that. I think there's some beauty to being raised by parents, and I have a wonderful older sister who bullied me like any older sister would. Saying that, like I was treated like any other child, which was wonderful and such a blessing. At the same time, I was never ridiculed. I was never asked to not speak what came to me, or not think through these things. I was an extremely introverted child. I had like my own little world. Now when I look at some of the kids who say they have a friend who is an invisible friend, I had many invisible friends. Okay, like many.
Yeah.
And that was a blessing to have been raised by parents in school. I don't recall a single point of time in my life where anybody told me, "Oh, no, that's not what you say," or call me names because I had some of this going on. So one thing led to other while I led a very, what I would call a normal childhood, whatever is normal in today's day and age. My parents also, when I was 8, got me initiated into a temple tradition. This was the tradition in Kamakya. Kamakya is a Shakti Peeth, again in Assam, considered to be a very, very powerful Shakti Peeth. And we may talk about it a little bit.
What just for our listenership who might not know about, what's the Shakti Peeth?
So Shakti in this case is goddess, and Peeth is a seat. So it is understood that across the world there are 51 different seats of the goddess that has enormous amounts of power. And so Kamakya is known for its fertility power. It is the yoni of the goddess that fell there. And so it's considered to be very, very powerful when it comes to fertility. So I was initiated without any fanfare. There is a story where my Baba, that's my dad, who passed away last year, he used to say this story where we went through the initiation, and I was 8. I don't remember anything. And so he said how we came back, and when we were apparently leaving, the priest had asked my father to give me a certain nut and a certain leaf to eat. And he did. He was like, she's too young, I'm not going to give her this. And he went to bed. So apparently, like sometime in the wee hours of the morning, something like 3 o'clock or something, I woke up Baba, and I said, where is the nut? Where is the leaf? And my dad freaked out. He was like, what the hell is happening here? Because there was no way I could have known that instruction was given to my dad, because it was so little, right? So I think that was the moment when my dad was like, okay, like
he started taking you seriously.
Maybe. I don't know how much, but I
better watch out for this one.
Yeah, watch out for this one.
Yeah.
So that was, that was such a great thing, because I could do nothing wrong, and my sister could do nothing right. Yeah. So I had the most, glorious teenage years. I was allowed to do anything I wanted.
He was probably petrified of you, wasn't he? You clairvoyant, and telling him that you knew all the instructions. He's probably terrified.
I don't think my dad was terrified of me, or at least that's not what I want to believe. I don't know. I wish he was here today. I would have gone back after this podcast and asked him, but he's not. But no, I think it was such a blessing because I pretty much did anything I wanted to do. I never wanted to study the sciences. And in India, if you were a good student and if you had what is called as a first class or a good grades in your high school, you take sciences. And if you were really, really bad, you take humanities. And
really?
Yeah.
That's the way it's gone now.
And,
What a shame.
oh my God, yes, always. Because you see, you could only become a lawyer, engineer, or a doctor if you really, or if you could not do anything, then become a teacher. So you can see where I am. But I remember this was, my high school was in New Delhi, and I remember the headmistress called me, and because she had seen my form where I had put in humanities courses for my high school, for my high school concentration, and she's the one I still remember, beautiful lady, and she was sitting in her headmistress chair on the table, and she said, "Do what you have to do. Do not listen to the society. Don't listen to people who will say, oh, you took humanities because you're a bad student or you're not intelligent enough." She said, and so, I've always had people like that. Always. It's been my biggest gift in life throughout my entire life. I've always had people who just come into my life and tell me, don't change. Do what you're supposed to do.
Bloody lucky.
Very.
Yeah.
Adam, I cannot tell you, as I've grown older, how much I've come to appreciate my star alignments and planet alignments.
Yeah.
So anyway, so life went on. I got my what is called as abhishekam, translated as kind of coronation. But when you're going through the Tantra initiation, you go through a series of training. It's kind of like a progressive, what I call it, like elementary school, middle school, high school kind of a deal. I don't know how you want to explain that, but that was around the age just before I turned 15.
As you were going through those, I didn't know that you actually. I thought you had the initiation and you just left it, but you were actually doing stuff all the time.
I was always.
You carried on.
I carried on because I did not know anything better. And remember, I thought everybody does it. I thought my sister did it, my cousins did it, my friends did it, because for me it was such a normal thing to do. There was nothing. I know it is very strange, but we have to also remember these were times of no Facebook. These were times of no social media, right? So, so life was, it was almost like I lived in my own world with my own unseen beings, and I projected that in some way to the seen world, right? And so for me, it was like, I didn't even question anything. So I continued on that path. I then wanted to become a nun. And so I went ahead and I started training in the Buddhist space, because that was one space where I thought I could become a nun.
But you couldn't do it in the Shakti one that you were in.
Okay, I have to tell you a little secret here. So there are gurus, women gurus, as you can, in the Śākta Tantra space.
Yeah.
But I didn't find them cool enough at that time. I was like, okay, they look kind of boring. The Buddhist nuns looked more cool. They had like shaved hair.
Right, okay.
Come on, I was 16, okay? And I was not pursuing the usual stuff that kids were pursuing. So I wanted to be the cool nun. So I thought, why not?
Fair enough. Yeah. I like the colours, Buddhist colours. Nice.
Colours,
reds, with ochres. Yeah. What before we go too divergent, what did the training look like then? Because I don't think you've spoken so much about your background. I mean, you mentioned later on in another podcast that I listened to that you had a crisis of faith later on in.
Yes.
And then I should have joined two and thought that you had a spiritual practice going on all the time as you were going on your career and doing different things. But what did your
spiritual practice kind of look like? And what were you taught from the age 8 till 16 or so, I've never heard you explain that.
You've not heard me say that because...
I've not heard that. No.
You've not heard that because I don't think I speak about that in public. It's... no, I know, but I'm just going to give a little bit of a glimpse. I know I'm not going to share a lot of my practice, also because I think that's where the sacred private space comes up. But essentially, what I can share, and I have shared this in classrooms, so I don't see why I can't share in a podcast. What happens in this is that you're given what is called as a Bija Mantra, and a seed mantra, and you're given an Ishta Devi or Ishta Deva, depending on your. What I say this, it's kind of like a BFF, like what these days kids call it, best friend forever. Okay, so it has to have a personality match where you don't want to be petrified of your cherished deva. At the same time, you don't want to be madly in love with them. You need to have that kind of an objective balance where you should be able to turn around and tell your Ishta Devi that that's bullshit. Just because you're a goddess doesn't mean you've got it right. So, I think I know this better than you. At the same time, sometimes when you slack, the goddess gives you one tight slap and says, now I'm the goddess, get back on track. So it's kind of a relationship that you cultivate. And I think what happens in this path, and I say this to all the students who have ever spoken to me, and I would love to say this here, is please do not take on a cherished god or a goddess or a guru just because somebody says that one is right for you. It needs to feel right, and we know it. We know when it feels right. The divine blueprint, as I say, is embedded in us. We just have to learn to read it, trust it, and kind of communicate with it. So, sorry, go ahead.
I was just kind of intrigued. I mean, on the rudimentary level, can you take on any goddess, or is it only certain ones within a certain lineage? Or are you able to take on, obviously it's going to be a goddess, right? So it can't be a male. So that's kind of excluding a whole bunch. It can be a man. Okay, so you can.
It can be a third gender. Now here's the answer to your question. Can you take any goddess or any divine being?
Any god.
Divine beings, right?
Right.
Now, the traditional answer is no. It is assigned from a tradition. My answer is no. We get to choose anyone, because as long as I don't, so I kind of have broken away a little bit from my tradition in terms of how I've come to understand my own practice and the way I kind of teach people. My thing is, the individual gets to define who is sacred. It can be a tree. It can be a plant. It can be an animal. Because animal spirits are as divine and as sacred. And if you look at Hindu mythology, there's always been animals and nature. It can be a river. It can be a god. It can be a goddess. It can be a guru. So I am saying, where I have kind of slightly shifted from the traditional way of seeing things, is it's BFF. And if it is BFF, I get to cultivate that relationship. Yes, I may begin with, because I have to begin somewhere. So sure, begin within the tradition. A lot of people like to delve with Kali, but we all know there are 12 different forms of Kali. Which form is she you want to engage with? And then as we engage, as we move forward, things will shift internally. And when that shift happens within this body, we will ask more questions. We will seek for more. We will pivot towards more. And it's perfectly fine. It's not like you're cheating. It's not like you've dumped your divine. You're progressing. So, you kind of can have two divine two Ishtadevis or two Ishtadevas at the same time. It's perfectly fine. So that's kind of how I have understood. So going back to your previous question, so how does the practice look like? So the practice is essentially begins with the mantra, and then you're given progressively specific instructions on how to engage with the divine, how to fine tune your phone line communication with the macrocosm. And so there are lots of meditative practices. There are bodily practices, like certain bandhas, the way you breathe a certain way to activate the subtle energy, the subtle body, the subtle energy in the subtle body. So that comes up. There are certain yantra practice, and in the Buddhist world, mandala practices that come up. So what happened was, as I went through life, I kind of have integrated, if you ask me today, integrated Śākta Tantra from Kamakya, Assam, and have integrated Nyingma or Vajrayana traditions kind of together. And that is today my practice. And I don't see any conflict whatsoever with that kind of an integration, because it feels right in my heart. It feels right in my physical body. It feels right in my spiritual body. So I don't see why not.
So there's so many kind of paths we can go from here. The Nyingma, I assume you learn in India. I mean, you were quite kind of close to that area of Buddhism, right? And the Tibetan Buddhism up there where you're from, right? But you didn't learn it there.
I studied Buddhist studies and I kind of studied more from the Theravada lens. My studies in India back in the 1990s was more on the lens of Theravada and Vinaya and so forth. But I think Nyingma kind of came when I started studying, when I became a scholar of Hindu Tantra. I discovered the Nyingma tradition, and it made perfect sense, because there were texts, there were commentaries, there were teachers that I could speak to that could explain to me something that was maybe told to me at 8 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, 15 years old. So the analogy I use here is, I was like the person who's running on a treadmill. And you keep running on a treadmill. You start at 3 miles an hour, then you do 4, then you do 5, then you do 6, then you do 7. But you kind of keep doing it because it becomes a habit. And there is kind of almost like an physical need, a mental need, an adrenal need, whatever, physiological stuff that happens. But at some point, I paused. And my scholarship made me pause. And it's when I paused, I started asking all kinds of questions, and the answers were not in my Kamakya community anymore, because that was a very different world. What I was reading was very different world. So I had to kind of bring two very, very different worlds together and make meaning for myself first in order to be able to teach what I learned.
All right. Well, I definitely want to go on to that and how things changed when you did pause. But let's just quickly speed up then and do like a whistle stop tour through how you got from India, from your school in Delhi to where you are today at Harvard. Right, in five minutes. 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to do it in 2 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So essentially,
via China and banking.
Via China and banking. So I did Buddhism. And then I decided not to don the cloth. And once you decide not to don the cloth, there was this sudden otherness, like, who are you? Then you become nobody, which was a whole different problem. And maybe we can do a whole different conversation on that. But I was that classic meme that you see where a monk goes for an interview and they say, do you have any other skills other than meditation? So I was that person. But then right people came.
We should have, didn't you give the Buddhist answer? I can sit. What did you say? I can sit. I can read, and I can fast, or something like that. You
right?
have said that.
But that would not give you a job and a paycheck. But essentially, again, right people came to my life at the right time. I got a job where I started my career with a nonprofit, and then moved into General Electric. So my first corporate job was. At that time called as General Electric International Services, now called as GenPact, I think. And so I started with that. And then I thought that's what I'm going to do with the financial services, and then went to Wipro, which is an IT company, and then Standard Chartered Bank, which is a UK bank. So I kind of thought that's what I'm going to do. I got myself an MBA. I was like, okay, life goes on. And it was wonderful. Honestly, Adam, again, no complaints, very, very blessed. I saw lots of success. At a very early age. From there, I moved, my family and we moved to China. It was still the corporate space that took us to China. But it was in China that I realized that was not necessarily, banking in China was a very different beast. And I did not know what I was doing anymore. So right people came to my life, and I got to teach at DaLian University, which is IT software computer engineering university. So I kind of taught there for 2.5 years. From there, we came to the United States. What
were you teaching there in the university? You weren't teaching philosophy or Indian religion?
No, that is not even allowed. I was teaching...
Oh, no, actually.
So I was actually working with the students that were graduating. So in DaLian, at that time, this was 2005, DaLian was becoming the next Silicon Valley of China kind of a situation. So there were all these multinational companies that had come there. There was a very steady stream of students that were coming out of Neusoft University and DaLian University. So they were coming out of that. But there was this big skill gap between training, between studying at the university and working with a multinational company. So I was kind of bridging that gap and getting them to understand what it means to study in a multinational company and also teach English, whatever that again means. So it was wonderful. It was a great break. We then came here to the United States in 2007. And one, because, I had to wait for paperwork to happen. And also certain health situations came up, which made me pause. And it was when I paused is when I, returned to religion. And that's when my study of religion started at Rice University. That's when I did my PhD. I graduated in...
Carolina? Is it Carolina?
No,
Rice?
Houston.
Where was that?
Houston,
Texas.
Rice is at Houston. Okay. I studied, I thought I'd study Buddhism, but then I kind of pivoted and my dissertation is pretty much an autoethnography of sorts. I really had to figure out what was happening to me, what had happened to me. And so I was, again, very lucky to have been allowed to do a PhD, which is kind of like, go figure out your own life. So I was like, not bad. So that's where Kundalini came up. My dissertation was on Kundalini yoga, rising in women's bodies today. And so I did.
Had you been practicing? Sorry.
No,
I was going to say, have you been practicing all along during the corporate life? Had you maintained the practice, or was there some kind of? You had.
Oh, okay, yeah. There was
right. So you're still super into it all the time throughout.
Because I do not know how to exist without it. I do not. I do not know how to live without my practice. I say my mantra. I don't even know how many thousands of times in a day. It's like I breathe and the mantra goes, right? There's nothing that I do that is outside of that realm, except for when I'm sleeping, of course, unless I'm engaged with liminal dreaming. That's a different intentional engagement, which I often practice, but that's a different story, right? So I've graduated in 2016. And then I've taught in many universities. So to correct, I'm not a professor at Harvard University. People will come after me if I make that claim.
No, sorry.
I know. No, that's okay.
Visiting. No, you're a visiting professor, aren't you?
Right.
Visiting.
And now I'm
Can we say that?
I'm a visiting lecturer, yes. And now I'm a fellow. Okay. It keeps changing. What's in a title?
We have the same thing in yoga. Anyway. We have the same thing in yoga. Yeah. You can't call people certified. It's like if you call them authorized. Right.
Yeah. But for the last 3 years, I've been with in the Harvard Divinity School. I taught for 6 courses already as the lecturer of Hindu traditions. And I'm going to return in the fall as a fellow in the Center for Study for World Religion. And my parent or my home university is University of Houston. So that's so I'm currently or not currently, I've been on leave from University of Houston for a while now,
Sequestered.
So that's my story.
Okay, right. Okay, well, we won't get into the politics of that, but right, that's the story. So without further ado, what about this Kundalini then? I mean, you mentioned also perhaps that you had this crisis of spirituality that you've been involved in something, and then you went to the field, and you're very frank, and as much as you really aren't simply an academic, you're really a practitioner first and foremost. Super involved with women practicing in the field, and at that point, I think you had a bit of a crisis and reassessed things. Maybe first just mention that, because I'm very intrigued to hear how that went.
Okay, I would love to tell these stories, Adam, but then don't come back and tell me that we ran out of time and we never spoke about Kundalini. That's on you.
We're going to speak about Kundalini. We'll get to Kundalini. We've got 20 minutes.
Yeah, see? How time flies. But no, so what happened really is, as I said, I was just a practitioner. I never read work on my tradition written by a scholar. So when I started reading books like, written by David Gordon White, Hugh Irwin, Lorelei Benarkey, it was very, and I don't have the right expression, but it was very confusing. It was like my brain was going through such an intense kind of a confusion, because I was like, what are they even talking about? I'm like, but I don't feel that way. Or 3, wait, where are these people? Or 4, are we even talking about the same spaces, right? I mean, it was an extremely, extremely confusing time. But I think with confusion, comes clarity, right? It is only when you ask certain questions. So I think when I went back into the field, and obviously since 2012, for the last decade, I've been into the field almost every year, several times in a year, sometimes. And it helps because my family is there. So, it kind of is different.
And it's a certain temple you go to, isn't it?
Yes, so I pretty much go to Kamakya for sure. I also do a lot of work in Tarapeeth, which is in West Bengal, and then all the kind of regional temples, because I love temples, Adam. I mean, you take me to a temple any day, I will go. I'm like, I love temples. But anyway, temples where there are female practitioners. I think that's very important. Otherwise, I find it very boring and very, very phallocentric. And I'm like, oh my God, like, please, So anyway,
is it unusual? Is it unusual to have female practitioners? I mean, you mentioned Talapita as very specific that that there's tantra and it's open, it's on show, and there are female. But that's kind of unusual, right? I mean, whenever I've been to temples, it's generally male Brahmins, really.
Right, very unusual. For them to be in public space. A lot of times they're there pretty much everywhere, but they're more so in like private spaces, or really you need to have a lot of access to know or to get access to them. So what happened was, as I started reading more of the scholarship, I kind of suddenly, it was that moment where your entire life gets questioned, and I didn't question. I felt let down. I felt like I was cheated by my Ishta Devi. I was cheated by my guru. And I don't mean cheated as in they did anything bad to me. But I was like, why did you not show me all the sides of the space? Or why did you hide? Or why did you not give me the faculty to see these things? A decade later, I think, because I was not ready, I think that was not the right time. I think things happen when the time is right. Maybe I was not emotionally ready. Maybe I was not spiritually ready. But anyway, when I got to see some of the blurry spaces, the gray spaces that I now only talk about, I realized how lucky I was, Adam, because I was always seen to have been born with a certain kind of prediction in my horoscope. I was seen as the guru, or that I will become the guru. And so I was never messed with. I was never, no abuse ever happened to me. That's a fact of life. Also, I had parents who kind of introduced me to that space, but did not donate me to a temple, right? I was always the child. I always lived at home. I lived as much of a normal life as possible. So I realized, one, how blessed I was. Two, by this time, and I've spoken about this, I was also a mother of a daughter. So, suddenly, as a mother, as a woman, as a scholar, as a practitioner, it was so difficult to bring these things together. And what is my responsibility? What is my role? What am I supposed to do or not do? So that was.
So what? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, a little bit of disillusion there, that you saw things, maybe aspects of abuse that maybe were hard to square. Yeah.
And it's not just a simple disillusionment. I really lost my religion at that time. And my advisor says this to all his PhD students, and I say to all my students, that you will lose your religion. There would be a moment of crisis if you're going to study religion. There has to be. And what do you do with it, right? I mean, how do you come out of it? So that's kind of what happened. And then... And I think at the same time, I've come to now finally understand what I'm supposed to do with it. And I'm hoping to achieve that. So that's where I am right now.
Right. So we're hoping to talk about Kundalini a little bit. Let's use that as a byway to I don't know so much about Kundalini. I know some a little bit about Kundalini classes in the West. I mean, what you gave me to read about Kundalini that you've written is very different to those classes that maybe we know in the West. I mean, do you want to just lay that territory down as to what you've recognized it involves in India?
Sure. First of all, I don't want to make it into a geographic thing, just because I don't want to say Kundalini in India is different from Kundalini in the West. I think that won't be an accurate statement. So first of all, I think before we even get into Kundalini, what we have to understand is where does where does this energy reside? And, when we talk about anahata, yes, of course, we say it's the heart chakra, right? Vishuddha, we say throat chakra, but that does not mean there is a chakra that resides inside the heart organ. And I think it's very important to specify that, because I've had so many people recently, I guess the pandemic, I don't know what has come up, where people come up and say, oh, I had a surgery and now I can't feel my Muladhara, or my Muladhara is not there. And I'm like, no. There is nothing to do with your uterus and your Swadhisthana and Muladhara, So there is a front of the body and there is the back of the body. In between the front and back, I call it the parchment paper thickness space. That's where the subtle energy, the subtle, the magic happens. So Kundalini, yes, in the modern West, does get defined in this very serpent narrative. But serpents are there in Indian literature, but most of them are nagas, and nagas are male serpent. Kundalini is a female serpent. So that's, first of all, one definition. But is it a serpent? That's the next question to ask. Go ahead.
And so just to backtrack for a second, the chakras, they're still related to points and the anatomical points in the spine. You're still suggesting that they are going up in ascendance, but just not tracked to specific organs, right? So they're not kind of literally, but there's still places in the body you say, well, Svadhisthana does lie at the base.
Correct.
Yeah, right? Yeah,
correct.
We're moving up.
Correct.
Yeah. And just not. Yeah.
And I think there is merit to explaining them as nerve plexus, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there is something. So no matter what, if I tap here, I will feel, very, very, like, even if I tap like this, I can feel like strong pain. If I tap here, I can feel it, it hurts. I mean, if I tap here, it hurts. So there are spaces, and the more we keep these channels open, just a gentle touch can also trigger off a whole opening. So yes, it's there in the body, but we explain it in the context of the organs or spaces, because we have to work with something here, right? So Kundalini is not, first of all, what I want to really state here, my understanding, again, please, that does not mean someone else is wrong. And I have to say, this is just my limited understanding. Number one, Kundalini is not a serpent energy. Some experience it in a serpentine fashion, but there are lots of people who experience it in a non-serpentine fashion. So in the field, I've met so many people who ridicule or reject somebody who says, I felt the Kundalini in my heart. They almost like say, oh, no, that's not Kundalini. How do you know it's not Kundalini? How do we know it is? So if we look at some of the Shaiva texts. So, for example, we have Tantra Sadbhava, where in this particular text, it's about the 7th, 8th century Shaiva texts like Siddha Yogeshwari Mata or Tantra Sadbhava, where Kundalini is coiled in the heart. So a lot of the field interviews I have done, they say, like, one of the most beautiful description was, she describes, this is a Tantra woman guru, and she describes it as a jyoti. She says it's like a light in your heart. And when it is activated, it's like you get goosebumps or chills, but not outside the body. These are now inside. Every cell inside your body is kind of vibrating with energy. And it's an opening. So
that's a radically different way to look at it. But I mean, it actually makes sense, because if you think of, think of Jesus, right? I mean, he wasn't ever talking about Kundalini rising from the base of his spine. If you look at the images of Jesus, it was the glowing heart, wasn't it? And
it was, but I'm scared of commenting on Jesus Christ because I'm not.
Well, I would say he would have had some Kundalini experience.
Okay,
no,
you are saying that, Adam. Yeah. I am not.
I'm saying that. No, you don't have to comment. I'm saying that Jesus was probably involved with Kundalini. Sure,
maybe.
absolutely.
I don't know. I don't know him. I've not cultivated a relationship with him, so I don't know what's going on with him. But essentially, I think what happens is, for a lot of people, Kundalini can rise from the Muladhara in a very, very serpentine fashion and goes all the way up into the crown. Yes, can happen. And when we looked at Shakchakra Nirupana and texts from there on, the Theosophical Society, the transmissions that came out of that, and Gopi Krishna's work and so forth, from there what we find is kind of a standardized format for what Kundalini is and how Kundalini rises and how Kundalini, what happens when Kundalini rises spontaneously, XYZ. And then we have the Kundalini SOS, the spiritual emergencies. Okay, that happens. I'm not for one saying that does not happen, but it also does not go to say that Kundalini cannot rise from the heart, or Kundalini cannot rise from the throat, or Kundalini cannot rise from the Agya, the crown, the third eye. And when it rises from different places, what I've come to understand from my research is the initial experience and the response is kind of a little different. And when it rises from the Muladhara and Swadhisthana, it is definitely a lot more. Because we don't have a register for it, we experience and explain it in a sexual energy form. So it does feel very orgasmic in nature. It does feel, like an activation of sexual fluids, because we don't know how else to explain it. But if it's rising from the heart, it could be this sudden oneness, this sudden experience of that moment. And again, so difficult to explain in words, but the sudden moment of oneness where there is no binary. There is this kind of union of sorts, even if it happens for a fraction of a second, even if it happens for 1 hour, even if it happens for 30 minutes, whatever, right? So it depends. It really depends on where it rises, and how you experience it immediately is going to be different. And because we found the serpentine narrative in the West to become like the standard format, and obviously most people in the West were writing about this in the 1960s and 70s, that became the popular narrative. That became the pop culture of sorts. That does not mean it does not happen in other situations and other experiences don't happen.
Was it? Yeah. I mean, is it male centric? I mean, from the serpent power, we have that, right? You don't think it's a particularly male narrative as opposed to something else? No, right? So it's across the board that this idea of the serpent power rising up is this. That would be my first question.
I can see why it comes as a male narrative, because, look at all these texts. Even in the 7th, 8th century, they were written by men, for men, practitioners are men, people talking about it mostly were men. But come on, look at the West and look at the number of women who have experienced Kundalini. So are we now going to say the Western women Kundalini experiences are not good enough, or they don't have the right to experience? Of course not. I'm a woman. But at the same time, another thing that I would like to state here before we move to the next question is, once the Kundalini has risen, either spontaneously or intentionally, something changes. And once that changes, you never go back to a state pre-Kundalini. And that is why there is this narrative saying, be careful. If you're pursuing Kundalini, we don't know where it will rise. We don't know how you will respond. And once you have experienced Kundalini, there is no turning back. There is no turning back. So I do.
Yeah, Yeah, watch out.
Watch out.
Watch out what you wish for. So Gopi Krishna is obviously famous for his work on it. He wrote a hell of a lot on this experience. Anyone else who you've read who writes on this? And it also the main kind of aspect that I read from Gopi Krishna's work is this very intense heating or drying experience, basically, that you have to kind of cope with, right?
Yes.
And if you can kind of cope with that and weather it out, then it's all good. But it's a very painful kind of hot and dry kind of experience, right?
Yes. So painful, yes, absolutely. Drying, I don't know. I think drying comes from the fact that there's so much of heat that is generated. So I think it's again a way of explaining kind of what is happening inside the body. I would say Gyanadev's Gyaneshwari is the most beautiful text that I have read. This is, I think, 11th or 12th century. I'm very bad with dates, but somewhere around that time. And Catherine Kinley has done a fabulous job of translating this text. I would say is my go-to, my most favorite Kundalini description that comes up. Having said that, the reason why I refrain from this drawing analogy is because, one, it goes back to where it has risen. If it has risen in your heart, it's a very different mechanism it's going to work versus if it has risen in your Muladhara. And drawing is not like cracking. It's like phoenix rising, correct? Right? So you need to go through this kind of a bodily transformation, elemental transformation, tattva cleansing, and it is painful. No two opinions about it. It is not pretty. It is very disillusioning. It is very confusing. You do sometimes feel like you've kind of lost it a little up here, as I say, on the top floors. It does feel like that sometimes, but you come back.
I suppose what everyone's going to be wanting to know is, has this happened to you?
Yes.
Right, okay. Just want to make that. Do you have that experience? Right. So, well, I mean, and is this the aim of all tantric practices?
No.
That you're trying to... No.
No.
Right, so there's a clear... Right.
No.
So,
and again, there is no... Everybody... Okay, so... now, again, this will come down to how do you define Tantra, right? I mean, it is so different for everyone.
That's another subject,
Yeah, I'm not going to now because that'll take away a lot of time. But the way I define Tantra, the objective is Jivanamukti, liberation in this lifetime. And what I mean by that is moving away from binary existence to binary existence to a non-binary existence, even if it is this minuscule a movement, even if it is a tiny little movement of how I see a man and a woman. What is the definition of being a masculine and feminine? Even if I can move that needle point, I've made progress. So and I'm not saying a politically correct acceptance. It is a true non-binary existence. And we all know how hard it is to achieve that. Not, at least I am a very flawed being. I've always said it. I am not getting moksha, much to the dismal of my teachers who keep saying, you're not supposed to say that. But no, I'm not. I'm a very flawed being and I love shoes. So given that I love shoes and I'm a flawed being, fine. But can I move the needle from point A to point A2? If I can do that in a true sense of the way, I have achieved something. And that is what the practice of Tantra does.
And go back to Kundalini. How is the experience? Obviously, the experience that you're talking about is very different to the current presentation of Kundalini that we're finding. We don't want to draw polarities here, but in general society, right. I mean, what is their intention, and how does that differ to what you're what you're seeing in traditional texts?
First of all, who am I to talk about their intentions? So if I will answer your question, but I hesitate and take a deep sigh because it can come across as so some pursue it because they are curious. Some pursue it because they really want to pursue it. Some pursue it because an experience happened in their life which was so intense that they're trying to find meaning, and the meaning making has taken them to Kundalini. And then there are some who are truly in that whole practice space and saying, okay, I'm going to use the Kundalini yoga practice to move from a non-binary existence, from a binary existence to a non-binary existence. So I would say it's a very it's a spectrum, and I think every individual gets to know why they are doing it.
I suppose if I was to qualify that question and re-ask it in a different way, should we be doing this? I mean, there's only one. I mean, essentially, from what you've been saying, there's only one, idea of Kundalini. It is an experience. It's a physical experience, and it's an intense experience. You say it's a life-changing experience. I've not experienced Kundalini. That doesn't seem to be something to mess around with, to do in a regular yoga class, right? We should, as I said before, in a kind of glib, flippant way, like, be careful what you careful what you wish for. I mean, do we really want that? I mean, it's, as many people have said, I mean, someone like U.G. Krishnamurti, I don't know whether you've read U.G. Krishnamurti, in his book, he goes through an experience, right? It sounds very similar to that after he's actually had a lecture with Jida Krishnamurti. He comes out of that, and then he has this kind of meltdown experience in his book, right? And he says, like, it's that, I wouldn't have wished it on my worst enemy. He kind of said, you don't want this. I wouldn't want it to.
I would say, anything around the Tantra path, it's about intention. Don't do it because you think it's a cool thing to do. Don't do it if you think you just want to try it and see how it goes. Because what if something happens in the first minute? What if something gets triggered? We can't control that. And there is no turning back. There is no turning back. So I would definitely forewarn people. I would say do it intentionally. Do it if you have the time and the energy and the space for it. If spontaneously it has risen and you were not pursuing it, then go ahead and kind of get the training required so that you can work with it intentionally, and you always have the control of that. What is it called? Like cooking range has that, you can turn on the heat. And
like a thermostat. Like a thermostat.
Yes. So totally.
Transistor.
We must
step it up or step it down. Yeah.
Correct. We must have the thermostat in our hands. And that requires practice. So let's not do this for the sake of it because it's a cool thing to do. And not all out-of-body experience or not all experiences that felt radical is Kundalini either. That's also important.
Right.
But that's another problem.
Yeah.
Anything that happens out of the ordinary
is now Kundalini.
In the modern West, I'm like, oh my God, why? Like, what made you think it is Kundalini? But I guess it happens. Yeah.
That's true. It is true. Yeah, any experience that's not kind of normal is now Kundalini. It seems. Yeah, but but seriously, for people that have had this experience, and I mean, for many people, if you read online, there's a lot online, right? You mentioned, I think there is a website or something called Kundalini SOS or something like that for people dealing with the. From my understanding, dealing with the experiences of Kundalini and the fallout that goes with that. You mentioned, kind of crazy making kind of propensity of this, right, and trying to kind of resolve or reconcile yourself to living in the world and having had such an intense experience. I mean, what any advice you would give for people that have, or are going through, something along, that does feel overwhelmingly like this?
I think my advice would be a few. Number one would be allow yourself, even if it is 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day, give yourself permission and let the energy know. It's kind of office hours. I think it really helps to have office hours and to tell the energy, hey, I have a lot going on. It's not possible for me to engage with you 365. And so do office hours. Once you acknowledge the energy, it's amazing. Maybe it's placebo. I don't know. But it is amazing how the energy will also be kind to you. So that's number one. Two, you may want to find teachers. Just because somebody says, they teach Kundalini does not mean they're the right teachers for you. Do your due diligence. Meet them. Speak to them. And it's okay to start with someone and then say, no, something is not working out here. So do not, listen to your gut. Listen to your internal voice. 3, read about it. 4, what is the purpose? Why are you seeking it? If it has risen spontaneously, great. But now why are you seeking it? I think that is a very important factor because there has to be a reason. And if you don't have a reason, then engage with it only for about 5 minutes a day. Give it its due respect, bow to it and say, I will come to it when I'm ready. So I would just those would be my advice.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point because I think people assume that maybe the highest goal of yoga is Kundalini, but that's not necessarily the case, right? It's one path of a number of different objectives within yoga. I mean, it's not all like you simply have to get that, and that's the kind of highest goal. Because I think that's often, the case that people believe now. Well, use yoga practice, and that's the highest kind of aim is to get this experience, which will then be enlightening, and I'll then be an enlightened being. But you're not suggesting that that's the case.
No, and that's the problem, right? With our yoga space, we seem to have these kind of medals that we are seeking, and that is exactly against what yoga tells us to do. There is no certification. I mean, I'm not saying yes, you do need yoga certification. So I'm debunking yoga certification. But what I'm saying is spiritual path is not about, I have this degree to show or that degree to show, right? I mean, come on, why are we doing it? If you're doing it to prove something to somebody, I think then that's not the objective. That kind of loses the meaning, right? I mean, I don't know. It's
We bloody hope so. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, I think we could go on, but we've got little bit of Kundalini under our belt, and probably a lot of background history, which is actually really interesting. And also, your work in the field. Can anyone actually? We've published a few things now that people can read. Where can they go and find out?
So I have a website now. It's called Sravana, my first name, .me, M-E. And as it's getting published, I make everything available to people. It took me a lot of time, Adam, to write my story. It was not easy. And so now I'm finally writing and publishing. And then comes the academic publishing, which is kind of a little slow. But it's happening, and you can read on my website, shravana.me.
Yeah, I think you have to everyone go and read on the website because what you're kind of writing about is pretty honest, and it's not in the public field generally, right?
Thank you.
It's
that's my goal. I've been given all these blessings. Now it's time to live it also publicly. So far, it's been more private. Yes.
Yeah. And let's say it's basically talking about female practitioners of Tantra and most physically in the physical sexual iterations of Tantra. So it's, it is honest, and it is very different and unusual in academia currently, let's say, right? So kind of swimming against the tide, and bravely so, I think, and I think as you've spoken on other podcasts, it does take a lot of bravery to speak out in the way that you are a lot on these subjects now. So
it does, and it also is scary. It's not easy, but one day at a time. Yeah,
and what the thing is, you're carving the way for many people who will then come out and and do it, and gradually that will become less of a, so you're blazing that trail, and it's very interesting, her work. So please go and have a look, and you'll enjoy it very much. Thank you, Sravana, I'm not going to attempt to say your full name again. I'll just stick to Sravana, and we're all safe there. And it's been a wonderful little chat with you, and a really, really fun, an academic, but really, really kind of fun character to engage with as well. So it's been wonderful to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye.